The ocean keeps secrets older than mountains. Long before trees rooted in soil or wings carved the air, life stirred in its depths, and it was here that the first chapters of our story were written. Yet those chapters were not written in ink, nor even in bone, but in stone. Deep-sea fossils that rewrite evolution wait in silence beneath crushing weight and eternal darkness, carrying truths that shatter the neat lines we once drew to explain life's unfolding. To touch one is to press a finger to the pulse of an ancient world, one that remembers what even Earth itself tried to forget. The ocean's oldest memory lies not in the shimmering surface we know, but in the abyss where light dies. Down there, silence is thick, broken only by the drift of silt, and every fallen creature that reaches the bottom is granted a chance at eternity. Where on land wind and rain gnaw the dead to dust, in the deep sea they are sealed, locked beneath layers of sediment so fine that a single moment can last forever. There, the fragile body of a worm, the impression of a jellyfish, or the armoured form of a trilobite can be preserved with a clarity so haunting that we recognise not just what it was, but how it lived, how it struggled, and how it became part of us. To say these fossils rewrite evolution is no exaggeration. The first paleontologists, scouring cliffs and deserts, thought they had the sequence of life nearly complete. They traced lines from simple shells to mighty reptiles, from fish to the first land dwellers, from beasts to us. It was a grand staircase, each step neat and ascending, but the fossils pried from the abyss do not obey that staircase. They speak of sudden leaps, of branches that split into forms unimagined, of experiments that thrived for millions of years only to vanish without leaving heirs. They tell us that life does not march but sprawls, its path twisting and reversing, erasing and rewriting. Imagine holding such a fossil in your hand. Perhaps a trilobite, its compound eyes still glimmering with crystals of calcite, staring back across 500 million years. Perhaps the coiled shell of an ammonite, each chamber spiralling like the universe itself, a geometry both alien and familiar. These are not just bones or shells, they are maps of survival. The grooves, the ridges, the spirals all tell of seas that roared long before our ancestors crawled from the waves. They are echoes of predators and prey locked in a dance as old as hunger itself. The ocean guards these memories jealously. To reach them, humans had to become trespassers in a world not meant for us. Our ships dragged nets and dredges across the seafloor, our drills cut deep into sediments untouched since the dawn of vertebrates, and in doing so we awakened voices long muted. Some of those voices whispered answers, others screamed contradictions. Fossils of soft-bodied creatures thought impossible to preserve appeared in the record. Entire groups of life unknown to science emerged from the mud, creatures so strange they seemed inventions rather than ancestors. With each discovery, what we thought we knew of the ocean's role in our making was overturned. But these fossils are not merely curiosities. They are proof that life is stubborn, that even in the most crushing, lightless realms, it thrives. They show us that survival has always been a negotiation with the abyss, and that our very existence is the result of countless bargains struck in those black depths. The creatures of the Cambrian, the armoured fishes of the Devonian, the colossal reptiles of the Mesozoic seas, they all rose, dominated, and fell, their remains settling into the deep to whisper what they had been. Each left behind not a story of triumph alone, but of fragility, of how close life has always been to silence. What makes the deep sea remarkable is not only its memory, but its honesty. Land is restless, mountains rise, rivers carve, winds strip, and time devours. The ocean floor, in its stillness, keeps records far more faithfully. Its layers are ledgers, each grain of silt a stroke of writing, each fossil a letter in a script older than alphabets. And when we learn to read it, we find that evolution is not the tale of progress we once thought, but of resilience, chance, and catastrophe. This is why the ocean's oldest memory matters, because in it we see ourselves not as the inevitable crown of creation, but as survivors of a story much longer, stranger, and more precarious than we dared to believe. We are the children of the abyss, shaped not only by sunlight and air, but by the crushing silence of the deep. And if we wish to understand where we are going, we must first listen to the fossils that rewrite what we thought we knew of where we came from. The ocean does not speak in words, but in stone. And in that stone, it remembers everything. Fossils in the dark abyss. The abyss has no sun. It is a kingdom of pressure and silence, where darkness presses against the eye as heavily as water crushes the chest. Yet within that silence, fossils sleep, fossils in the dark abyss that hold fragments of forgotten worlds. They are not found easily. They are drawn up from black sediments by machines, or revealed in rare windows where undersea cliffs shear away. And when they surface, still slick with salt water, they carry a story no library can contain. The untold record of life that flourished unseen, written not in ink, but in stone, bone, and shell. The creatures that reach this eternal graveyard do not vanish quickly. On land, scavengers and storms strip the dead within days. In shallow seas, currents scatter bones into nothing. But in the abyss, death is slower, heavier, more complete. A fish, sinking from above, may drift for hours before settling on the silt, where it is soon buried beneath a snowfall of organic dust. The fine sediment wraps around it like a shroud, sealing its form against decay. The darkness here is not destruction, it is preservation, and because of that, the abyss is less a tomb than a vault, where the oldest stories are locked away. To pry open that vault is to discover how misleading our first maps of life truly were. For centuries, paleontology relied on cliffsides, deserts, and quarries, where fossils were revealed by the violence of erosion. These sites gave us trilobites, ammonites, and the bones of dinosaurs. They drew a rough outline of history, but it was in the abyss, in those layers where sunlight has never touched, that contradictions emerged. Fossils appeared in strata where they did not belong, showing that creatures thought long extinct had lingered in deep waters long after their surface kin had perished. Others revealed entire branches of life missed by surface stone, ghostly forms without living descendants, preserved only because the abyss had hidden them. One such find was the Burgess Shale, discovered high in the Canadian Rockies but born in the depths of an ancient sea. Within its dark slates were creatures so strange they defied classification. Anomalocaris, with its spined arms and circular maw. Hallucigenia, a worm walking on spines like stilts. Opabinia, with 5 eyes staring in different directions and a long grasping trunk. These were fossils in the dark abyss, messengers from a time when life's rules had not yet been written. Their forms rewrote our understanding of the Cambrian explosion, that mysterious moment when life seemed to burst suddenly into complexity. Without the preservation of deep sediment, their existence would have vanished, and with it the proof that evolution is not steady progress but wild experimentation. But the abyss holds more than monsters of the Cambrian. In the black mud of later ages lie the armoured fish of the Devonian seas, their plates still sharp-edged, their jaws frozen mid-bite. Coiled ammonites, spiralling endlessly, speak of Cretaceous waters swarming with predators. Even sharks, those eternal hunters, leave their teeth buried in the sediment, serrated blades waiting to be read. Each fossil carries with it a reminder that the sea has always been more crowded, more violent, and more alive than the land could ever claim. The greatest irony is that many of these fossils are discovered far from the ocean. Tectonic upheavals lift ancient seafloors into mountains, carrying the abyss to heights where snow now falls. To stand on a peak and hold a trilobite in hand is to realize that what lies beneath your boots was once a black sea where no light reached. The mountain is the abyss inverted, the vault of the deep thrown open to the sky, and in that inversion, memory returns. Each fossil from the abyss is also a warning. It shows how often life has been broken by catastrophe. The Permian extinction, the most devastating of all, left its marks in the ocean floor. Entire ecosystems collapsed, their creatures entombed in dark strata, proof of a world gasping in poison and heat. Yet from that same abyss, survivors emerged tiny, fragile, yet unyielding who would seed the next age of life. The dark abyss, then, is both graveyard and nursery, the place where endings and beginnings intertwine. To study these fossils is to confront a truth humbling to humankind, that the story of life is not orderly. It is not a ladder with rungs of progress, but a shattered mosaic. Pieces lie buried in darkness, and only when enough are gathered do the patterns emerge. Even then, the patterns shift with each new discovery, as if the ocean delights in reminding us that certainty is illusion. When scientists lower submersibles into the abyss, their lights cut only narrow cones into the dark. Beyond those beams lies eternity, and in that eternity are fossils yet unseen, creatures that may again force us to redraw the tree of life, to accept that our ancestors did not rise from the sea in a single line, but in a web of trials and errors that crisscross the ocean floor. The abyss, in its silence, mocks our desire for straight stories. It offers instead truth messy, tangled, and far older than we can imagine. The fossils in the dark abyss are not just remnants of what once was. They are reminders of what still is, that life is fragile, that survival depends on balance, and that the deep sea remembers every victory and every failure. The ocean's vault is vast, and it is not yet emptied. What it holds may yet change how we see ourselves, for to understand life's beginning, one must kneel in the dark and listen to stone. When stone remembers flesh, stone does not breathe, yet it remembers. It remembers with a patience beyond time, holding the outline of muscle, the curve of bone, the faint ripple of a fin. When stone remembers flesh, it grants the dead a second life, not in motion or blood, but in form etched forever into layers of sediment that have hardened into eternity. To study such fossils is to realize that death is not always an ending. Sometimes, under the right weight, under the right silence, the body becomes its own monument, a memory pressed into rock for millions of years. The transformation is not instant. Flesh usually dissolves within hours, leaving behind nothing but shadow. Yet in certain places, quiet seabeds, stagnant shallows, abyssal plains, the process of decay is slowed. Silt settles gently, grain upon grain, covering the fallen creature in a blanket so fine it denies oxygen its feast. Time, in the abyss, does not gnaw so quickly. Bones remain intact. Shells remain unbroken. Even the delicate traces of skin, feather, or scale may endure. What should have rotted instead endures, sculpted by the earth into a portrait of what once lived. This miracle is more than luck. It is chemistry, pressure, patience. The soft tissue is replaced, molecule by molecule, by minerals that mimic its shape. A worm becomes quartz. A fish becomes limestone. A shell hardens into ironstone. The body vanishes, yet its likeness remains, as if stone itself has chosen to keep the memory of what water and air would have erased. These are not merely imprints, they are testimonies. They show that every life, however fragile, has a chance to outwit oblivion if it finds sanctuary in the earth. And the details they reveal are breathtaking. The eye of a trilobite, fossilized with lenses of calcite, still reflects light as it once did in Cambrian seas. The feathers of a primitive bird, darkened into shale, whisper of flight at a time when dinosaurs still thundered across the land. Even the spiral of an ammonite's shell, preserved with jeweled opal glimmering in its chambers, speaks of the deep mathematical rhythms that guided life's design. To gaze on these relics is to see not just bones, but the very architecture of survival written in stone. Yet memory can also deceive. Fossils are incomplete, scattered fragments of an endless tapestry. They hint at creatures stranger than anything alive today, yet often only in outline. A jaw without its skull, a spine without its flesh. Whole families of life remain known only by shards, and still, even in these fragments, the presence of flesh is felt. The curve of a tooth reminds us of hunger. The hollow of a rib cage suggests lungs drawing in breath. The socket of an eye stares back, a ghost that never quite releases its gaze. Stone remembers, but it does not tell everything. It whispers instead, forcing us to imagine the rest. In the deep sea, this whisper is more complete than anywhere else. Abyssal fossils are often preserved with uncanny clarity. The fine mud of the ocean floor captures impressions invisible elsewhere, the trace of gills, the outline of soft fins, the faint track of a creature's last movement before death. In these sediments, stone remembers flesh not as broken remnants, but as nearly living images. They show us not only what creatures looked like, but how they moved, how they hunted, how they fought to exist in waters long vanished. And with each revelation, the story of evolution bends. The more faithfully stone remembers, the more it defies our attempts to tell life's tale as a clean line from simple to complex. Instead, fossils reveal detours, failures, sudden bursts of innovation. They show fish with limbs where none should exist, mollusks with shapes that echo future designs, creatures so bizarre they appear to belong to some alien world. These are not accidents of memory. They are truths carved into stone, contradicting the neat charts of science and forcing us to admit that the past is far stranger than we thought. The paradox is haunting. Stone, lifeless and cold, becomes the most faithful witness to life. It has no pulse, no hunger, no fear, yet it preserves those very qualities in the remains it cradles. It does not choose what to remember. It remembers because the ocean gave it no choice, because time pressed it into permanence. And so, we who walk on land inherit a library carved in silence, page upon page of bodies turned into rock, each one a story of triumph, struggle, and inevitable fall. When stone remembers flesh, it forces us to confront our own fragility. We are flesh too, quick to fade, quick to vanish into soil and wind. Few of us will leave any trace. Yet the possibility exists, however slim, that even now, somewhere in the dark abyss, the remains of a creature sink slowly, settling into silt that will harden and endure. Perhaps one day, long after our kind has passed, another will hold that stone, see the memory it carries, and wonder at the life it once was. The abyss preserves because it must. Stone remembers because it can. And in that remembrance, life achieves its strangest form of immortality, not in bloodlines or breath, but in silence, weight, and the eternal patience of the earth. Creatures, older than bones. Before bone, there was flesh. Before skeletons hardened into lasting frames, the seas teemed with beings so delicate, so strange, that their very existence should have dissolved into nothing. Yet the ocean has a way of remembering, and in rare pockets of preservation, it has shown us creatures older than bones. These beings belong to a time when life had only just begun to experiment with form, when the invention of a rigid skeleton was still a distant dream, and when the rules of survival were written in softness. They were fragile, transient, almost ghost-like, yet they carried the spark that would one day ignite into all vertebrate life. The oldest of these forms are the Ediacaran creatures, shadows of existence pressed into stone nearly 600 million years ago. They had no bones, no shells, not even mouths or eyes in many cases. Their bodies were quilted mats, discs, fronds, or ridged forms that spread across the seafloor like alien gardens. To look at them is to be struck with both wonder and unease. They do not resemble any animal alive today, nor do they fit neatly into the branches of our evolutionary tree. Some seem to breathe by osmosis, drinking in nutrients directly through their skin. Others floated like cushions of jelly, drifting without muscle or bone to steer them. And yet they thrived, populating seas that had never known predators, long before the arrival of the great armoured creatures of later ages. Their fossils are not bones, but impressions, delicate outlines stamped into fine sand and preserved by chance. They whisper of a world where survival did not yet require teeth or claws, where life was not yet locked in endless combat. Instead, the seas of the Ediacaran were gardens of stillness, filled with creatures so soft that even the gentlest current could change their fate. But from this silence, from this world of fragile bodies, evolution was gathering its strength. The first muscles would soon contract. The first mouths would soon bite, and when they did, the era of softness ended forever. To imagine creatures older than bones is to imagine a world unrecognizable to us. We are so accustomed to the architecture of skeletons, the sturdy scaffolding of ribs, spines, and skulls, that it is hard to conceive of life without them. Yet for millions of years, life flourished without hardness. Worm-like forms wriggled through sediments. Disc-shaped beings lay upon the seabed, harvesting the faintest traces of sunlight. Branching fronds reached upward, perhaps filtering nutrients from the water. They were not hunters, for there was nothing yet to hunt. They were not prey, for predators had not been invented. It was a brief and fragile piece in the history of life, and it would not last. Then came the Cambrian, and with it, the birth of weapons. Jaws appeared, exoskeletons hardened, claws evolved. The world of softness was overrun. Many of the Ediacaran creatures vanished, leaving behind only their ghostly imprints in stone. They had been successful in their time, but they were unprepared for the violence that followed. Evolution rewards those who adapt, and the soft-bodied giants of the Ediacaran lacked the defences to survive in seas suddenly filled with predators. In their place arose trilobites with armoured shells, worms with teeth, and bizarre monsters like Anomalocaris, whose spiked appendages and circular maw made it a terror of its age. Yet the memory of creatures older than bones remains vital. They remind us that evolution is not only about strength, but about possibility. Without them, the stage would never have been set for the explosion of forms that followed. They were the first experiments in complexity, the first to try out shapes beyond the simplicity of bacteria and algae. They show us that life does not march forward according to plan, but gropes its way into new forms, some destined to vanish, others to endure. Even today, their strangeness unsettles us. When paleontologists first uncovered the quilted forms of Dickinsonia, or the frond-like Charnia, debates raged over what they even were. Were they animals? Plants? Fungi? Something entirely separate? A forgotten kingdom of life that left no heirs? The answer remains elusive. What is certain is that they lived, they multiplied, and they shaped the conditions that would allow true animals to rise. Their legacy is hidden in the rocks, in the faint impressions left where once their soft bodies pressed against sand. To run a finger across such a fossil is to touch the memory of life before bones, before teeth, before the age of struggle. It is to encounter the ocean's earliest attempt at complexity, preserved against all odds. In those delicate ridges and shallow outlines lies the testimony that even the weakest of forms can leave a mark that endures beyond empires. The creatures older than bones may have vanished, but their story is not silence. It is the opening note in the symphony of life, the whisper that became a roar. They show us that strength begins in fragility, that permanence is born from the most temporary of shapes. In them, the ocean remembered a time before skeletons, before predators, before war. And in remembering, it preserved the innocence of life's first flowering, carried forward in stone, long after the bodies themselves had dissolved into nothing. The Cambrian mirage. The Cambrian world was a dream given flesh. A sudden explosion of forms so strange and unearthly that even today they seem more like visions than ancestors. Scientists call it the Cambrian explosion, but it might better be called the Cambrian mirage, for it appeared almost overnight in the fossil record, dazzling with variety and complexity, and yet cloaked in mystery. How could life leap so suddenly from softness to armour, from drifting shapes to hunters armed with jaws and claws? The rocks preserve the spectacle, but the reasons remain elusive, as if the ocean itself wanted to astonish and confound us in equal measure. Before the Cambrian, life was simple. The seas were filled with creatures older than bones, soft-bodied fronds, and quilted mats that bore little resemblance to anything we know. They lived slowly, drifting or absorbing, content in their stillness. Yet with the dawn of the Cambrian, roughly 541 million years ago, the stage transformed. In the space of a few million years, an instant on the scale of eternity, the seas became arenas of innovation. Eyes appeared for the first time, and with sight came pursuit. Jaws followed, and with jaws came violence. The gentle gardens of the Ediacaran gave way to an ocean of predators and prey, each shaping the other in a spiral of escalation that birthed complexity. It is in the fossil beds of places like the Burgess Shale that the Cambrian mirage comes alive. Here, creatures are preserved in exquisite detail, as if the abyss itself wanted their memory to be eternal. There is Anomalocaris, the great terror of its day, with spined arms sweeping prey into its round, whirling mouth. There is Opabinia, so bizarre it seems conjured from delirium, bearing 5 eyes and a long proboscis like a clawed trunk. There is Hallucigenia, a worm bristling with spines, walking clumsily on stick-like legs, so alien that even its orientation baffled scientists for decades. These creatures defy neat categories, as if evolution in its youth was experimenting wildly, testing designs without plan or restraint. The mirage is not only in their strangeness, but in their suddenness. For so long, scientists could find no trace of transitional forms leading up to this explosion. It was as if life had simply leapt forward in a single bound, from shadows into brilliance. The Cambrian seas held trilobites with crystal eyes, worms with armour, creatures armoured with plates, spines and shells. Every survival strategy seemed to arrive at once, as though evolution had been holding its breath for eons and then released it in a storm. And yet, the Cambrian mirage also deceives. The explosion we see in the fossil record may not mark the true beginning of complexity, but the moment when conditions finally allowed the ocean to remember it. Before the Cambrian, soft-bodied creatures rarely left fossils, their forms too delicate to withstand time. When harder parts, shells, spines, teeth evolved, they carved themselves into stone with far greater permanence. Perhaps life had been diversifying in silence long before, hidden in the abyss, unpreserved and unremembered. The Cambrian may not have been an instant birth, but the unveiling of what had long been brewing in darkness. Still, even with this caution, the Cambrian remains a marvel. The sheer pace of change is unmatched in the fossil record. For the first time, ecosystems bristled with complexity. Predators hunted, prey fled, burrowers reshaped the seabed, reefs began to rise. It was a riot of form, a fever of invention. To peer into this age is to glimpse a world both alien and intimately ours, for within those wild experiments lay the roots of all future life. The eyes of trilobites foreshadow our own. The armoured plates of early worms hint at the shields of vertebrate ancestors. The struggles of predator and prey set in motion the arms race that still defines existence today. The Cambrian mirage is not only about what was gained, but about what was lost. Most of the creatures of this age have no descendants. They were evolutionary experiments that thrived briefly, then vanished without a trace beyond the fossils that remember them. The ocean tested possibilities, keeping some, discarding others. We walk in the legacy of survivors, but countless forms lie in stone as reminders of how narrow the path to endurance truly is. To hold a Cambrian fossil is to stare into the ocean's dream, a dream half illusion, half revelation. It dazzles with its strangeness, yet humbles with its fragility. For the mirage tells us that evolution is not steady progress, but a tempest of trials, a theatre of sudden appearances and swift extinctions. It is not a ladder, but a shifting mirage on the horizon, drawing us toward understanding even as it blurs. The Cambrian seas roared with life that seemed to bloom from nothing. And though the mirage has long since faded, leaving only stone to whisper of its brilliance, its echoes still shape us. For in that age of experiments and upheavals, the foundations of every creature alive today were laid. We are, in the end, children of the Cambrian mirage, born of its chaos, shaped by its brilliance, and forever haunted by the strange shadows it left behind in stone. Trilobites, masters of the ancient seafloor. They scuttled across the ancient seabeds like armoured kings, their faceted eyes catching glimmers of light in waters that had never known the shadow of man. Trilobites, masters of the ancient seafloor. Rulers in a world where life was still young and unsteady. For nearly 300 million years they endured, longer than the reign of dinosaurs, longer than the kingdoms of any empire we could ever build. To look upon a trilobite fossil is to see not merely a creature, but an age the stamp of an ocean that once teemed with their countless forms, each one a silent witness to the drama of evolution's earliest battles. They were not small footnotes in history, but empires of their own. Trilobites spread through every sea, from shallow coasts to deeper waters, multiplying into tens of thousands of species. Their armoured shells were not just protection but perfection, crafted by evolution into segmented fortresses that allowed both flexibility and strength. Their bodies were divided like clockwork, each plate a shield, each joint a marvel of design. They crawled, they burrowed, they swam, shaping the very ecosystems they inhabited. For as long as they reigned, the seafloor belonged to them. Their mastery lay not only in their armour but in their vision. Trilobites were among the first creatures on Earth to develop true eyes, and not simple pits of light but complex crystalline lenses made of calcite. These lenses, still glimmering in fossils today, gave them sight sharp enough to track movement in dim Cambrian waters. To imagine the first gaze of a trilobite is to imagine the moment when the ocean changed forever, when prey could be pursued and predators evaded with precision. Vision brought competition, competition brought innovation, and from that innovation rose the endless arms race that still drives life today. But trilobites were more than hunters. They were builders of stability, keystones of their worlds. Some grazed peacefully on algae, scraping sustenance from the seafloor. Others sifted through silt, consuming the smallest traces of life hidden in the mud. Some swam freely, prowling like armoured fish. Their diversity was staggering, a vast web of niches all filled by their countless forms. To the creatures of their time, trilobites were everything prey to some, predators to others, but always present, shaping the very rhythm of life beneath the waves. And their fossils speak with clarity unmatched. Few creatures left behind such abundant records. Their exoskeletons, shed again and again through growth, carpeted the seabeds in a rain of armour. Each molt became a fossil in waiting, a snapshot of life unfolding layer by layer. For paleontologists, this abundance is a gift. It allows us to trace their rise, their dominance, and their eventual decline with remarkable precision. Through them, we read the timeline of ancient seas more clearly than through almost any other creature. Yet even masters fall. Trilobites, for all their resilience, could not escape the scythe of extinction. They survived upheavals that crushed other lineages, weathering the Ordovician and Devonian crises. But the relentless march of change eroded their dominion. As fish grew stronger and predators more cunning, trilobites were pushed from their thrones. By the end of the Permian, the great extinction that ended most life on Earth swept them into silence. A dynasty 300 million years strong ended not with triumph, but with disappearance, leaving only their stone-carved shadows behind. Still, their memory endures. In the ridges of their shells, in the complexity of their eyes, in the sheer abundance of their fossils, trilobites continue to command respect. They remind us of life's early grandeur, of a time when the seafloor bristled with armoured multitudes, each one a small sovereign in its domain. They remind us that dominance does not guarantee eternity, that even the longest reigns crumble in the face of time's patient erosion. To hold a trilobite fossil is to hold a fragment of an ancient empire. Its ridges fit the palm like a crafted jewel. Its eyes still glimmer faintly as if unwilling to release their vision. It is as though the ocean itself pressed its memory into stone, unwilling to forget the first true masters of its flaw. Long after their bodies turned to dust, their story remained, etched deeper than bone, deeper than history, a testament to both the triumph and the fragility of life. The trilobites may have vanished, but the seafloor remembers. It remembers their countless legions, their armoured march across epochs, their rise and their fall. And through stone, we too remember them not as relics, but as rulers of a world that once was, a reminder that even the greatest masters must one day bow to silence. Monsters of the Silurian depths. The seas of the Silurian were not gentle. They were arenas of teeth, armour and shadow, where survival demanded invention and the weak were stripped away without mercy. To descend into those waters is to step into a realm dominated by monsters of the Silurian depths, creatures that marked the first flowering of complex marine predators, beings whose bodies told the story of evolution, learning the art of war. This was an age when the oceans grew crowded with power, when armoured fishes began to rise, when jaws sharpened, and when the abyss was ruled by forms both grotesque and magnificent. The Silurian period, beginning around 443 million years ago, followed one of Earth's greatest mass extinctions. The seas had been emptied of much, but emptiness is opportunity. What survived began to diversify with renewed ferocity, and out of that crucible came new masters of the deep. Among them were the Eurypterids, the so-called sea scorpions. Some were no larger than a hand, but others stretched over 2 meters long, armoured and armed with spiked claws. They were hunters of both fish and each other, their segmented bodies propelling them across seabeds with unsettling speed. To the creatures of the Silurian, the sight of a looming Eurypterid must have been terror itself, a wall of armoured limbs descending from the dark. But they were not alone. This was also the time when jawed fishes, the gnathostomes, first appeared. Their arrival changed everything. Until then, most marine animals relied on simple feeding strategies, filtering particles, grazing on algae, or scavenging the remains of others. But with jaws came true predation. Placoderms, the armoured fishes, emerged in the Silurian as heavy, plated predators, their mouths lined with sharpened plates strong enough to crush shell and flesh alike. Though they would reach their full glory in the Devonian, the Silurian seas already trembled with their promise. They were tanks of flesh, moving fortresses that turned the balance of power toward the vertebrates, marking the beginning of a dynasty that still endures in sharks, mammals, and ourselves. Not all monsters relied on armour and size. Some carried their menace in stealth and strangeness. Early sharks began their quiet rise here, small and sleek, their cartilaginous skeletons leaving only teeth as their legacy. Those teeth, serrated and glimmering in the fossil record, hint at how swiftly they learned to slice through flesh. The shark's gift was not bulk but agility, a different kind of supremacy that would allow its descendants to endure long after the sea scorpions and armoured fishes were dust. Even in their early forms, they were hunters designed for eternity. The reefs of the Silurian added another layer of peril. Coral and sponge built vast undersea fortresses, the first great reefs in Earth's history. These structures were not peaceful havens, but traps and hunting grounds. In the shadows of coral towers, Eurypterids lurked, while armoured fishes patrolled the open water. Smaller creatures darted through the labyrinth, knowing that one misstep could mean death in the jaws of a predator. It was an ecosystem thick with danger, each level of life sharpened by the constant pressure of survival. To call them monsters is not to strip them of their dignity. it is to recognize the raw awe they commanded. The Silurian seas were the proving grounds of evolution's arsenal, and every weapon we know today, jaws, armor, spines, venom, speed, was honed in those depths. Even the trilobites, once unchallenged rulers of the seafloor, found themselves harried and hunted, their dominance waning under the rise of new hunters. The balance of power had shifted. The ocean was no longer a place of drifting peace, but of ceaseless conflict. And yet, there was beauty in the ferocity. The Eurypterids, with their jointed limbs and serrated pincers, were grotesque but mesmerizing, their armored bodies glinting in the dim light. The armored fishes gleamed like living statues, their plates patterned with ridges and grooves as intricate as any work of art. Even the earliest sharks, with their sleek forms, carried the promise of the elegant predators they would become. The monsters of the Silurian depths remind us that power can be terrible and beautiful at once, that the very strangeness of life is what makes it endure. They ruled their age, but like all rulers, they fell. By the Devonian, new predators rose to surpass them. New weapons reshaped the seas. The sea scorpions shrank, retreating into shallower waters before vanishing altogether. The armored fishes reached their zenith, only to collapse in the next great extinction. But the memory of the Silurian remains etched in stone, in the claws of Eurypterids and the plated jaws of placoderms, in the teeth of sharks that still slice the seas today. The monsters of the Silurian depths were not aberrations, they were heralds. They marked the shift from seas ruled by armor and instinct to seas ruled by innovation and adaptation. Their legacy swims beside us even now, in the hunters that prowl the oceans, in the jaws that bite, in the endless contest between predator and prey. To remember them is to remember the first true age of monsters, when the abyss became a crucible of power, and evolution revealed that its most enduring law was not peace, but struggle. Devonian Seas of Giants. The Devonian was an age when the seas swelled with power, when life itself seemed to grow restless and ambitious, stretching into forms both vast and terrifying. Known as the Age of Fishes, it was a time when the ocean floor shook beneath the weight of giants, when predators reached monstrous size, and when the balance of existence tilted towards strength and hunger. To step into those waters is to enter a world of leviathans, a realm where every shadow might conceal a jaw large enough to swallow a man whole. These were the Devonian Seas of Giants, where the very concept of scale seemed rewritten by evolution's hand. Among the most fearsome of these rulers was Dunkleosteus, a placoderm whose armoured skull was a fortress of bone, and whose jaw could shear through flesh and shell with unrelenting force. Growing up to 10 meters long, it was a predator without equal, a nightmare of steel and muscle that dominated the open waters. Its bite, reconstructed through fossil evidence, was one of the most powerful ever to exist. Strong enough to crush ammonite shells or cleave rival predators in half. To smaller creatures, even to other armoured fishes, the approach of Dunkleosteus was the end of all things. Its legacy is not merely its size, but its sheer dominance, the emblem of an age when power was brute and unapologetic. But Dunkleosteus was not alone. The Devonian seas were crowded with armoured titans, the placoderms that had risen from humble Silurian origins into living war machines. Their bodies were sheathed in heavy plates, their mouths lined with sharpened bony ridges that acted like teeth. Some grazed, some scavenged, but many were predators, their sheer mass enough to overwhelm. They were tanks swimming in an ocean already dangerous, and their reign would stretch for tens of millions of years before the waves turned against them. Yet the seas were not only filled with monsters of armour and bone. Sharks, those eternal hunters, were also on the rise. Though smaller than the armoured placoderms of the Devonian, they carried with them an agility and cunning that foreshadowed their future supremacy. Cladocelache, an early shark, cut through the waters with sleek precision, its body free of heavy plating and built for speed. In time, such designs would outlast the lumbering placoderms, for evolution does not always reward strength alone, but endurance and adaptability. The Devonian Seas of Giants were as much about transition as about spectacle, foreshadowing the rulers of ages yet to come. Even the invertebrates of the Devonian swelled to remarkable size. Ammonites and orthocones stretched their coiled and conical shells into massive lengths, drifting through the water like living ships. Some of the straight-shelled orthocones grew over 9 meters long, their tentacles spreading to seize prey in the dim light of deep waters. They were silent giants, floating fortresses of flesh and shell that added to the grandeur of Devonian seas. In their spirals and cones, we see not just predators but engineers of stability, building ecosystems through their abundance and serving as both hunters and hunted in the intricate dance of survival. The reefs of this age were equally monumental. Towering coral structures, vast and sprawling, rose like undersea cities, home to countless forms of life. These reefs were the largest the Earth had ever seen, stretching for hundreds of kilometers and providing both refuge and battlefield for the giants above. Within them, armored fishes lurked, sharks prowled, and invertebrates thrived in endless variety. To swim through a Devonian reef was to navigate a labyrinth alive with colour and danger, where beauty and death coexisted in every shadow. But the age of giants carried a curse. The Devonian was marked by extinctions, pulses of catastrophe that swept through its oceans. Climate shifts, drops in oxygen, and changing seas struck down many of the very giants that had defined the age. Whole lineages of placoderms, trilobites, and reef builders collapsed, leaving gaps that would never be filled again. The greatest reefs of Earth's history fell silent, their coral towers reduced to rubble. Even Dunkleosteus, lord of the seas, met its end, vanishing in the dying breaths of the Devonian. Giants, it seems, carry the weight of fragility as much as might. And yet, the Devonian did not end in silence. From the ruins of giants came the survivors who would shape all that followed. The sharks endured, lean and relentless. Bony fishes, ancestors of modern species, flourished in the gaps left behind. Some among them began to experiment with limbs, their fins thickening, their bones strengthening, until the first vertebrates clambered onto land. The Devonian seas of giants may have thundered with the footsteps of leviathans, but their true gift was the bridge they laid between water and earth. To remember the Devonian is to remember both awe and impermanence. It was an age of grandeur, when the seas boiled with colossal power, yet also an age that revealed how swiftly dominance can dissolve. The giants of that time, so terrible and magnificent, remind us that life's rule is fleeting, that every empire of the sea is temporary. But in their scale, in their bones pressed into stone, we still feel their shadow. The Devonian seas of giants are gone, but the echoes of their reign shape every predator and every reef that exists today. They were titans of their age. And though the ocean has moved on, it still remembers their thunder. The Carboniferous oceans of shadow. The Carboniferous seas were worlds of twilight, heavy with silence and shadow. On land, vast forests of towering ferns and lycophytes reached into humid skies. But beneath the waves, a different story was unfolding. These were the Carboniferous oceans of shadow, realms where predators lurked in gloom, and where life, both delicate and monstrous, learned to adapt to an environment shaped by darkness, depth, and constant peril. To enter those waters was to enter a theatre of concealment, where light fell dim and danger moved unseen. It was in these oceans that sharks became sovereign. Having risen humbly in earlier ages, they now exploded into forms both varied and formidable, dominating seas as never before. Xenacanthus, with its eel-like body and distinctive spine jutting from the back of its skull, prowled rivers and coastal seas. Stethocanthus carried a dorsal fin shaped like an anvil, a strange and unsettling feature that may have been used for display or mating rituals. Some were slender and swift, slicing through shadow with effortless grace, while others grew massive, their jaws lined with serrated teeth designed to tear through armoured prey. This was the age when sharks claimed their crown, and their silhouettes, dark and swift, defined the oceans as much as the trees defined the land. The invertebrates, too, thrived in these waters. Ammonites and their cousins coiled their shells into endless spirals, drifting through the dim seas with tentacles ready to seize the unwary. Their relatives, the straight-shelled nautiloids, still stretched their long bodies like ghostly lances into the depths. Crinoids, the sea lilies, anchored themselves in vast meadows, their feathered arms waving like black gardens in the current. These forests of crinoids transformed seafloors into alien landscapes, swaying fields of delicate fronds hiding creatures both predator and prey. To wander among them would be to walk through a dream, a place of beauty, masking constant threat. Yet, the Carboniferous oceans were not merely places of elegance, they were realms of leviathans. The Arthrodires, armoured fishes that had once ruled the Devonian, were gone, but new titans rose to take their place. Rhizodonts, enormous lobe-finned fishes stretching up to 7 meters long, prowled rivers and coastal seas, their jaws filled with dagger-like teeth. They were ambush predators striking from concealment, their massive bodies blending with the murk until it was too late for prey to escape. In their shadows, smaller fish and early amphibians lived in constant fear, their very existence shaped by the lurking presence of giants. The reefs of this age told another story. Unlike the great coral citadels of the Devonian, Carboniferous reefs were built by sponges and algae, forming dark labyrinths of stone and shadow. These reefs were both havens and traps, offering shelter to the small and ambush points for the great. Within their winding passages, sharks patrolled with patience, ammonites drifted in spirals, and crustaceans scuttled between crevices, seeking refuge from the relentless jaws of predators. The reefs were quieter than those of previous ages, more muted, yet no less alive places where survival depended on silence and stillness. It was also in these seas that the first rays of landward life began to return. Amphibians, newly emerged from the swamps above, often sought refuge in brackish waters clinging to the margins between forest and sea. Some evolved into labyrinthodonts, hulking creatures with sprawling limbs and powerful jaws, equally at home in murky rivers and shallow coasts. Their presence blurred the line between land and ocean, reminding us that the Carboniferous was not only an age of shadow but also of transition, where the boundaries of worlds began to dissolve. The very atmosphere of the Carboniferous lent strangeness to its oceans. The Earth was rich in oxygen then, more than at any other time in history, fueling life to grow larger and stranger. Insects on land reached enormous sizes, dragonflies with wingspans of nearly a meter dominating the skies. In the water, this abundance supported ecosystems thick with giants, each more dependent on concealment, ambush, and endurance. The oceans were crowded, yet quiet, full of lurking presences that thrived in dimness rather than open light. It was an age when shadow itself seemed a weapon, cloaking predator and prey alike. And yet, for all their might, the oceans of shadow carried fragility. The reefs, already subdued, would suffer in the upheavals to come. The great rhizodonts and labyrinthodonts would one day vanish, leaving no heirs to their size. Even many shark lineages, despite their dominance, would give way to newer forms. The Carboniferous was an age suspended between triumph and loss, a twilight in Earth's story where giants thrived yet prepared unknowingly for their own erasure. To remember the Carboniferous seas is to imagine waters both majestic and foreboding. They were not the bright, colourful reefs of later ages, but dusky arenas of patience and ambush. They were places where survival belonged to those who could endure the dim, who could strike from the cover of darkness, who could master the silence of shadow. In those waters, sharks sharpened their supremacy, invertebrates wove intricate worlds of shell and frond, and vertebrates pressed ever closer to the boundary of land. The Carboniferous oceans of shadow remind us that life does not always bloom in brilliance. Sometimes it thrives in quiet power, in murk and mystery, in realms where darkness itself shapes the destiny of all who enter. To walk the shores of that age and look down into the waters would have been to stare into a black mirror, knowing that in the unseen depths below, monsters were waiting, silent and eternal as the shadow itself. Permian extinction beneath the waves. The Permian seas were the stage of a tragedy unlike any the Earth had seen before. For millions of years, oceans had roared with giants, armoured fishes, coiled ammonites, and predators that turned the abyss into an endless war of survival. But at the end of the Permian period, roughly 252 million years ago, the waters fell silent. It was the greatest dying in the history of life, the Permian extinction beneath the waves. More than 90% of marine species vanished, whole lineages erased in what seemed like a single stroke. To imagine those seas is to imagine the unravelling of an entire world, as if the ocean itself, once the cradle of life, had turned hostile to its children. The cause was not one thing, but many, converging like blows from an unseen hammer. Volcanic eruptions in Siberia spilled fire into the sky for hundreds of thousands of years, releasing carbon dioxide in amounts so vast the atmosphere thickened with poison. The seas absorbed this gas, becoming acidic, eating away at shells and dissolving the very skeletons of creatures that had endured for ages. Oxygen, once abundant, thinned in the water until vast stretches of ocean became stagnant, suffocating the life within them. For creatures that had survived countless battles, it was not tooth or claw that ended them, but the invisible grip of a poisoned sea. The reefs, once bustling cities of coral and sponge, collapsed into rubble. Trilobites, which had survived for 300 million years and weathered multiple cataclysms, finally met their end, their armoured legions extinguished. brachiopods, crinoids, and ammonites once the anchors of marine ecosystems dwindled to near nothing. Great predators that had ruled for ages, like the last of the armoured fishes and early sharks, found their prey gone, their dominion empty. Even plankton, the foundation of all marine life, faltered, plunging food chains into chaos. In this dying world, survival was not about strength but chance. A few lineages endured the ancestors of modern corals, some bony fishes, and certain sharks clung to existence in pockets where oxygen still lingered. But they were exceptions, not the rule. For most, the Permian seas became a grave. Imagine swimming through those waters as life collapsed. Reefs that had teemed with colour now silent and barren. Skeletons littering the seafloor, the once busy dark filled only with drifting carcasses. It was not extinction as an event, but extinction as a suffocating atmosphere. A world where even the strongest were powerless. The scale of the loss is almost beyond comprehension. 90% of marine life gone, eras of adaptation, countless experiments of evolution, all erased in less time than it had taken for the trilobites to diversify. The Permian extinction was not just an ending, it was a reset. When the waters finally stilled and the poison receded, the ocean was no longer the same. It was stripped bare, humbled, and waiting for new life to claim it. And from that silence, survivors rose. Ammonites, though nearly destroyed, managed to endure, carrying their spiral shells into the next age. Sharks, scarred but resilient, swam on, their adaptability granting them another chance. Tiny ancestors of modern bony fishes found footholds in the emptiness, seeds of future dominance. The extinction was both destruction and creation, obliterating one world to clear the way for another. In the shadows of loss, the first faint whispers of the Mesozoic seas began to stir. But the memory of the Permian dying lingers in every fossil bed where entire ecosystems are frozen in their final moments. It lingers in the abrupt break between ancient seas ruled by trilobites and new seas ruled by creatures we know today. It lingers in the realization that life, however mighty, hangs always by a thread, subject to forces larger than any claw or jaw. To study the Permian extinction beneath the waves is to confront the vulnerability of life itself, the truth that survival is not promised, and that even the oceans, vast and eternal as they seem, can be brought to the edge of silence. The end of the Permian was not just an extinction, it was an erasure of worlds. Yet in its aftermath the seas did not remain barren. They filled again, slowly, painfully, with new forms that would define the Mesozoic. The death of the old was the birth of the new. But the shadows of that great dying still drift beneath the waves, reminding us that the ocean remembers everything, its triumphs, its empires, and its collapses. The Permian seas, once loud with giants, teach us that even the most powerful reigns end not with glory but with silence. Jurassic leviathans. The oceans of the Jurassic were kingdoms of monsters, vast and unrelenting, where every wave concealed a hunter and every shadow could be the last sight of the unwary. On land, dinosaurs strode across fern-filled plains and conifer forests, but beneath the waves, another empire ruled, an empire of leviathans. These were not sluggish reptiles or drifting fish, but titans of flesh and bone, predators built on scales of grandeur we can scarcely imagine. The Jurassic leviathans remind us that the sea was never passive. It was a crucible of terror, beauty, and dominance, where creatures of impossible size and power carved out their reign. Foremost among them were the ichthyosaurs, whose sleek bodies rivaled modern dolphins in form but dwarfed them in size. Some stretched to 20 meters, their massive eyes adapted for hunting in the twilight depths where light barely reached. They were built for speed, their long muscular tails whipping them through water with precision, their jaws bristling with teeth fit for catching swift prey. To the ammonites and fish that drifted in their path, there was no escape, only the sudden rush of darkness, the snap of jaws, and silence. In the ichthyosaurs, the ocean crafted hunters of elegance and efficiency, merging reptilian might with a design so perfect it would echo again in the mammals that came long after. But the ichthyosaurs were not alone. Rising alongside them were the plesiosaurs, their long necks arching through the water like serpents of myth. With bodies shaped like great barrels and flippers strong as oars, they swam with a grace that belied their bulk. Some species grew to lengths of 15 meters, their necks alone stretching half that measure, giving them reach to strike at fish and squid from a distance. To witness a school of plesiosaurs gliding through Jurassic waters must have been like glimpsing dragons at play, their sinuous forms weaving in and out of the blue gloom, each one a reminder that myth is often memory sharpened by awe. Yet for all their strangeness, it was the pliosaurs who commanded fear above all. If the plesiosaurs were dragons, then pliosaurs were demons. Shorter-necked, broader, and infinitely more terrible, they were the apex predators of the Jurassic seas. Liopleurodon, the most fearsome of them, stretched over 20 meters and carried jaws as long as a man is tall, filled with teeth like knives. Its skull alone was the size of a small boat, its bite force enough to tear through anything it encountered. Ammonites, ichthyosaurs, even other pliosaurs, nothing in the Jurassic oceans was safe from its hunger. To imagine a Liopleurodon bursting from the depths is to imagine the embodiment of terror itself, a shadow so vast it could blot out the light above. Around these leviathans swarmed the multitudes of prey that sustained them. Ammonites filled the seas, their coiled shells gleaming like living jewels, their tentacles darting to grasp passing morsels. Belemnites, relatives of squid, thrived in great numbers, their torpedo-shaped bodies fleeing in darting schools. The seas teemed with fish of every shape and size, many armoured or swift, their own survival sharpened by the predators that haunted them. Coral reefs returned after the Permian collapse, creating havens of colour and life where smaller creatures found refuge, though even these sanctuaries were not beyond the reach of the Leviathan's hunger. The Jurassic seas were also arenas of constant rivalry. Pliosaurs fought pliosaurs, ichthyosaurs clashed over hunting grounds, and plesiosaurs competed for prey. The oceans were never empty, they were always crowded with power, a rolling theatre of life and death. And yet, within this violence, there was also resilience. These leviathans were not freaks of chance, but the product of eons of adaptation, each one shaped by the demands of an unforgiving sea. Their dominance was proof that life, even after the greatest extinctions, can not only recover but thrive in forms that defy imagination. But even in this golden age of marine reptiles, shadows gathered. The ichthyosaurs, despite their perfection, would not endure. By the end of the Jurassic, their diversity began to fade, their supremacy challenged by rivals. The pliosaurs, too, would eventually yield to newer predators, yet in their time they were rulers without equal, kings of a realm as vast as the land of dinosaurs above. The fossils of these leviathans remind us of an ocean that pulsed with ferocity and scale beyond anything known today. Their bones, pulled from stone, reveal not only their size but the scars of their battles, the wear of their teeth, the evidence of prey within their stomachs. They lived hard lives, filled with struggle, but their mastery of the seas was absolute. To speak of Jurassic leviathans is to speak of a time when the ocean itself was myth made real, when the boundaries between the imagined and the living blurred. They were dragons and demons, titans and nightmares, filling the deep with movement and hunger. Their reign has passed, their bones locked in rock, but their echoes remain. In every breaking wave, and in every silent shadow of the deep, the memory of the Jurassic leviathans endures a reminder that the sea has always kept monsters, and that once those monsters ruled without rival. The Cretaceous seas of terror. The seas of the Cretaceous were not gentle. They were red with hunger, blue with depth, and alive with shadows so vast that even the greatest creatures of the land would have seemed small by comparison. While Tyrannosaurus stalked the forests and plains, the oceans harboured their own tyrants, rulers built on scales and muscle, with jaws wide enough to swallow a man whole. These were the Cretaceous seas of terror, a realm where the abyss itself seemed to breathe menace, and where life was locked in a struggle between titans. At the forefront of this watery dominion were the mosasaurs, serpents of nightmare size. They were not fish, nor were they dinosaurs, but marine reptiles that had turned the ocean into their kingdom. Some stretched over 15 meters, their long bodies powered by flippers that drove them through the water with startling speed. Their skulls were monstrous weapons, hinged to open impossibly wide, their teeth curved and conical, designed for seizing and ripping. Mosasaurs were not cautious hunters, they were violent opportunists, striking at anything within reach. Ammonites, giant fish, plesiosaurs, even other mosasaurs fell to their relentless appetite. When they rose from the deep, they did not merely feed, they devoured. But they were not alone. The plesiosaurs still haunted the seas, though their reign was waning. The long-necked Elasmosaurus, its neck extending like a coiling serpent for over 7 meters, glided through the waters with slow, deliberate grace. From the safety of distance, it darted its head into schools of fish, seizing prey with swift precision. Yet their grace could not match the savagery of the mosasaurs. Many must have fallen prey to their serpent kin, their long bodies crushed in the jaws of larger hunters. Even so, their eerie beauty made them ghosts of the Cretaceous seas, reminders that not all terror wears the face of brute strength, some terrify by their very strangeness. Above and around these reptilian rulers swam other giants. Gphactinus, the monstrous bony fish, stretched up to 6 meters, its body built like a blade, its teeth curved into cruel spikes. Fossils show entire smaller fish swallowed whole inside its belly, proof of its reckless hunger. To see a school of Gphactinus moving together would have been like watching a squadron of steel weapons slice through the sea, leaving trails of blood in their wake. They were not gentle swimmers, but marauders, driven by instinct to consume and conquer. And then there were the sharks, eternal survivors. Cretoxorhina, sometimes called the Ginsu shark, prowled these seas with jaws packed full of serrated teeth sharp enough to shear through bone. Though smaller than later monsters like Megalodon, in its time Cretoxorhina was a terror without equal, chasing down mosasaur young, harrying plesiosaurs, and devouring fish in endless pursuit. It was sleek and fast, a killer sharpened by millions of years of refinement, and it reminds us that in the Cretaceous oceans, no predator swam unchallenged. The invertebrates of these seas also grew vast and strange. Ammonites, coiled and armoured, flourished in staggering numbers, some with shells wider than a man is tall. Their intricate spirals gleamed in the filtered light, hiding the soft-bodied hunters within. To smaller fish and drifting creatures, the reach of their tentacles spelled doom. But ammonites were also prey, their shells cracked open by mosasaurs and sharks, their spirals scattered like broken trophies across the seabed. They were both predators and victims, their abundance the very fuel of the terror above them. Reefs once again dominated shallow seas, sprawling with life, dazzling with colour but always shadowed by the presence of hunters. In the labyrinth of coral, smaller fish darted for safety, crustaceans scuttled across the ridges, and ichthyodectids prowled, their long jaws snapping up anything slow enough to be caught. Even the reefs, bright with life, were arenas of constant death, their beauty masking the violence that kept the ecosystem alive. The Cretaceous seas of terror were also seas of noise and struggle. Imagine the shriek of a dying ammonite torn from its shell, the snap of pliosaurs clashing in ambush, the thunder of waves breaking above while beneath the surface entire battles unfolded in silence, but for the tearing of flesh. It was not a place of peace but of perpetual war, where every creature, no matter how large, was hunted by another. Even mosasaurs, kings of the deep, bore scars on their skulls and bodies, proof that their rule was not uncontested but bought in blood. And yet, like all empires, this world would end. The asteroid that spelled doom for the dinosaurs on land also shattered the seas. Darkness fell over the oceans, cutting off the sunlight, killing the plankton that fed the base of the food chain. Without them, the ammonites perished, the reefs crumbled, and the giants of the deep starved. Mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, Gphactinus all vanished. Only sharks, some fish, and a scattering of survivors endured, carrying the memory of terror into new ages. To speak of the Cretaceous seas is to speak of grandeur wrapped in violence. They were oceans where size itself was a weapon, where hunger was endless, and where the weak vanished quickly into the shadows of the strong. They remind us that history is not written by the gentle, but by the ruthless, and that the ocean has always demanded struggle for survival. The Cretaceous seas of terror are gone, but their echoes remain in stone. The spiraled shells of ammonites, the jagged teeth of sharks, the fossilized jaws of mosasaurs, they remind us that once, long before our kind ever dreamed of sailing the oceans, the seas belonged to monsters, and terror itself was the tide that ruled the world. Ghosts of the Paleogene deep. When the asteroid struck and the Cretaceous ended, the seas fell into silence. The mosasaurs were gone, the plesiosaurs extinguished, the ammonites shattered into memory. For a time, it seemed the ocean itself had been emptied of giants, reduced to shadows of what once was. Yet life does not surrender so easily. In the wake of catastrophe, survivors crept back into the dark waters, reshaping the seas into something new. What emerged were not the towering reptiles of old, but quieter rulers, the ghosts of the Paleogene deep, creatures that carried the scars of extinction and the promise of rebirth. The Paleogene, beginning 66 million years ago, was a haunted age. The ocean's ecosystems had been broken at their base, plankton nearly destroyed, food chains torn apart. Recovery was slow, fragile, like green shoots rising from ash. But as the world warmed again, new hunters appeared in forms strange yet familiar. Sharks, eternal heirs of the sea, reclaimed dominance with sharpened ferocity. Species like Otodus, the ancestor of Megalodon, grew immense, slicing through schools of fish with precision. Their serrated teeth, scattered across ancient seabeds, are reminders that though the reptiles had perished, the ocean had not forgotten the shape of terror. Other survivors too emerged into dominance. Bony fishes, once overshadowed by reptiles and monstrous ammonites, expanded into countless niches. Some grew vast, like the early tunas and swordfish, predators of speed and muscle. Others remained small but abundant, the foundation for rebuilding the food chains. Around them, marine mammals began their tentative steps into the water. Whales were not yet the titans we know today, but creatures halfway between land and sea, their legs shrinking, their bodies streamlining. Ambulocetus, the walking whale, haunted both rivers and shallow coasts, a crocodile-like predator slipping into the waves. To the creatures of the Paleogene, it must have seemed like ghosts were stalking them, land-born hunters returning to the realm of the deep. The abyss itself, long thought barren, began to whisper with life again. Strange fishes adapted to the crushing pressure and eternal dark, their bodies glowing with bioluminescence, their jaws equipped with needle teeth. These were not leviathans of sheer bulk but shadows, ambush predators that lured prey with lights like fallen stars. The lanternfish, the angler, the gulper eel descendants of these early pioneers remind us that survival sometimes belongs not to the largest but to the strangest. In the Paleogene deep, terror was no longer measured in size but in subtlety, in adaptations so uncanny they bordered on the spectral. And yet, remnants of the past lingered. Nautiluses, survivors from the age of ammonites, still drifted through the seas in coiled shells. Crocodilians prowled coastlines, echoing their ancient kin. Even some small lineages of reptiles clung to the edges of survival. The Paleogene oceans were haunted because they bore the echoes of what had been the absence of mosasaurs, as tangible as the presence of sharks. The missing spirals of ammonites felt in every empty reef. The ghosts of the deep were not only the living but also the silences left behind, the shapes that should have been there but were gone. As the epoch unfolded, true giants began to rise again. Whales, no longer tentative walkers, grew bolder in their aquatic lives. Basilosaurus stretched over 15 meters, its long serpentine body more reptilian than mammalian in appearance. It swam like a mosasaur reborn, jaws lined with sharp teeth preying on fish, sharks, and even other whales. In Basilosaurus, the ghost of the Cretaceous lived again, a mammal wearing the mantle of reptilian kings. Its presence was proof that the sea does not easily let go of its titans. It only reshapes them. But alongside the birth of new monsters came fragility. The reefs, still struggling after the extinction, remained unstable, their builders changed. The balance of ecosystems was delicate, each link in the chain vulnerable to collapse. The Paleogene seas were places of recovery, but also of unease, as though the ocean itself remembered the devastation it had endured. Even as life flourished anew, extinction hovered like a shadow, a reminder that the abyss keeps its debts. To walk the shores of the Paleogene and look out upon its waters would have been to see a world both alien and familiar. The waves no longer hid the reptiles of old, but they did conceal hunters just as fearsome, only cloaked in new forms. Whales that looked like serpents, sharks that grew larger than any before, fish whose bodies glowed in the dark. These were the ghosts of the Paleogene deep, born from survival, shaped by catastrophe, and carrying with them the echoes of the monsters that came before. They remind us that the ocean never truly forgets. Its memory is long, its shadows deep. Each extinction leaves not only bones but impressions, absences that mould what comes after. The Paleogene seas were haunted not because they were empty, but because every new creature carried within it the legacy of those lost. To study them is to see both presence and absence intertwined, to realize that every ghost of the deep is a teacher, whispering that life endures, but never without a price. Fossils locked in, cold and pressure. The ocean floor is a graveyard, but not all graves are equal. Some are shallow, disturbed by waves and currents, where bones scatter and shells grind to sand. Others lie deeper, in silence, where mud drifts down like snowfall and buries the dead with patience. But the deepest, the coldest, the places where pressure crushes and time hardens, these are tombs unlike any other. Here, fossils are locked in cold and pressure, preserved with a precision that turns fragile bodies into immortal stone. They are not just remnants, but voices, sealed whispers of a world that should have vanished yet still speaks. In the abyss, far below sunlight, conditions are merciless. Temperatures hover just above freezing, currents move slowly if at all, and the weight of the ocean above presses with a force beyond imagination. To most life, this is a place of endurance, but for the dead it is a place of preservation. Creatures that sink into these depths do not always decay, as they would in shallower seas. Instead, they are embraced by fine sediments that shield them from scavengers and oxygen. Layer after layer of silt presses down, compacting, sealing, until flesh becomes memory and bones are entombed in stone. What should have been forgotten is instead fossilized, hidden beneath kilometers of ocean floor waiting for discovery. Among the most haunting examples of this preservation are the soft-bodied creatures, the ones that should never have survived time at all. Normally, the record of life is biased toward the durable shells, teeth, bones, but in certain deep-sea deposits, even jellyfish, worms, and delicate imprints of skin or scales are found, preserved in ghostly detail. These are revelations, for they remind us that life is not only written in stone but also in shadows captured by sediment. To hold such a fossil is to glimpse the impossible, to see a moment frozen not by chance but by the crushing patience of the deep. Cold itself is a conspirator in this preservation. In frigid waters, bacterial decay slows, giving sediment time to bury what would otherwise rot away. The chemistry of the deep can even replace tissues with minerals, atom by atom, until what was once flesh becomes quartz, pyrite, or calcite. Sometimes, entire ecosystems are captured this way. Schools of fish, clusters of corals, or swarms of plankton, all sealed together in a sudden layer, like a snapshot of life arrested mid-motion. These slabs of stone are not just fossils, but archives, windows into vanished seas that reveal behaviors as well as bodies. Fish caught in the act of swimming, prey locked in the jaws of predators, entire dramas frozen in the still theatre of rock. The pressure of the abyss, too, plays its role. At depths where sunlight never reaches, the weight of water compacts sediments into dense layers, hardening them into archives that can last for eons. In some cases, the pressure can flatten and preserve even the most delicate impressions, like the wings of an ancient insect or the ripple marks of a jellyfish drifting across the seabed. The ocean floor becomes not only a grave but a press, stamping the forms of the dead into permanence. It is as if the sea itself, aware of its role as the great destroyer, chose in these rare places to become the great archivist instead. Among the most striking finds of this kind are fossils of creatures from the Burgess Shale and similar deposits, where deep burial preserved entire soft-bodied communities from the Cambrian. Here, we see the strange, alien faces of early evolution Hallucigenia, with its spines and limbs, Anomalocaris with its great grasping claws, creatures that look more like dreams than animals. Without the cold and pressure of deep burial, such beings would have vanished utterly, and we would never have known how strange the dawn of animal life truly was. These fossils remind us that the sea holds not only bones but visions, locked away until the stone is split and the ghosts step forward. Even today, the deep sea continues this work of silent preservation. Modern whale falls when a whale dies and sinks to the abyssal plain become oases of life, but in time they too are buried and fossilized. Teeth, vertebrae, even entire skeletons may endure, waiting for millions of years beneath the crushing dark. In these remains, the ocean keeps its record, not only of creatures long gone, but of its own processes, its patience, and its memory. Each fossil locked in cold and pressure is more than an object, it is a story kept safe by the abyss itself. Yet these fossils are not easily given up. To find them, we must cut through stone, drill into seabeds, or raise slabs from mountains where ancient oceans once lay. When they emerge, it is as though time itself has been breached, as though the cold grip of the deep has opened a hand to reveal what it has hidden. They come to us fragile yet eternal, delicate yet indestructible, and in their forms we see not only what was but what might have been. To stand before such fossils is to feel awe not only at the creatures themselves but at the forces that preserved them. Cold, pressure, sediment, and silence together, they created something more enduring than life, a record immune to the passing of ages. These fossils remind us that history is not written only in words or memory but in stone, in patterns pressed into rock by a sea that never forgets. The fossils locked in cold and pressure are the whispers of the deep ocean, carried forward across millions of years. They are ghosts pressed flat, shadows made solid, the very breath of the past hardened into permanence. Without them, our story of evolution would be half-blind, our knowledge a fractured mirror. But with them, we glimpse the unbroken chain, the continuity of life from the alien Cambrian to the seas we know today. In their silence, they speak louder than any chronicle. The ocean remembers, and through its cold embrace, it ensures we do too. The abyss as time capsule. The abyss has always been more than a place of darkness. It is a vault, a silent cathedral where time itself seems to pause. While the surface world shifts through fire and ice, extinctions and rebirths, the deep ocean keeps its secrets, sealing them away in silt and stone. To descend into those depths is to descend into history, where the ocean floor becomes not merely a grave but a time capsule. Locked within are the whispers of vanished worlds, preserved by the weight of water and the patience of eternity. The abyss does not forget, it remembers everything. Every grain of sediment that settles to the bottom carries a fragment of the past. Dust from deserts, ash from volcanoes, shells of plankton no larger than a pinhead, all drift down and accumulate, layering the seabed year after year. To the eye, it is only mud, yet within that mud lies a record written finer than any scroll. Each layer tells of climates long gone, of species that flourished or faltered, of catastrophes that swept the earth. Drill into those sediments and the cores become pages, revealing not only fossils but the rhythms of oceans themselves. The waxing and waning of ice ages, the rise and fall of oxygen, the pulse of life and death across millions of years. But it is not only sediments that the abyss guards. Whole creatures find their way down, bodies sinking into the quiet after their final breath. Whales, colossal and mighty, fall to the seafloor and become islands of life, feeding countless scavengers until their bones alone remain. Over ages, those bones may harden into fossils, still lying in the same position as the day they struck the mud. Fish, crustaceans, even delicate jellies if the conditions are right, they too are locked into the capsule, transformed by minerals until time can no longer touch them. The abyss is not just a tomb but a conservator, holding in trust the fragile shapes of life that would otherwise have been erased. There are places where this preservation is uncanny, where entire ecosystems are captured intact. In some deep-sea deposits, the outlines of fish schools can still be seen, each body frozen mid-swim as if the ocean had pressed pause. Predator and prey are locked together, jaws around fins, struggles turned into stone. It is as if the abyss wished to remind us not just of what lived, but how it lived, preserving not merely forms, but moments. These time capsules are not static, they are snapshots of movement, drama, and survival, sealed away in the deep for eternity. The abyss also carries the record of catastrophe. When asteroids strike or volcanoes darken the skies, their fingerprints descend into the sea. Iridium-rich layers mark the day the dinosaurs died. Bands of ash trace back to eruptions that shook continents. Even the faint traces of ancient tsunamis can be read in layers of disturbed sediment. The abyss does not care for glory or tragedy. It records both with equal patience. Every disaster leaves its mark, buried but indelible, ensuring that nothing in Earth's story truly vanishes. Cold and pressure, the twin guardians of the deep, ensure this memory endures. In the crushing dark, decay slows, scavengers thin, and what is buried stays buried. At depths where light has never touched, where the temperature barely rises above freezing, time seems to move differently. Creatures that would have rotted on a shallow shore are preserved for ages. Even the chemistry of the water works in favour of preservation, minerals seeping into tissues and bones until they are transformed into stone. The abyss is patient, and in that patience lies immortality. Yet the time capsule of the abyss is not only for the ancient, it records us as well. Plastic, steel, and oil now drift down with the same silence as volcanic ash or plankton shells. Future ages, should they unearth the sediments we leave behind, will read the story of humanity as clearly as we read the story of ammonites and trilobites. The abyss does not choose what it keeps everything impartial and relentless, our triumphs and our follies alike sealed beside the bones of vanished monsters. To study these records is to open a dialogue with deep time. A single fossil fish, pressed flat in ancient shale, tells of oceans that no longer exist. A layer of dark clay at the Cretaceous boundary whispers of an impact that ended worlds. Even the simple shells of plankton found in sediment cores reveal climates warmer or colder than our own, reminding us that Earth is not fixed but ever shifting. The abyss speaks in fragments, but when those fragments are pieced together, they reveal a story longer and more intricate than any written by human hand. The abyss as time capsule humbles us. It reminds us that nothing is truly lost, that the sea has kept every secret, every failure, every triumph. It is a library where the books are written in stone, sealed under crushing black water, waiting for us to pry them open. To look upon such fossils is to look into a mirror that shows not only what came before but also what may come again, for the ocean remembers everything. It remembers the dawn of creatures without bones, the rise and fall of leviathans, the silence of extinctions, the return of life after catastrophe. It remembers the footsteps of humanity now pressed into its mud, as it once remembered the fins of ammonites and the skeletons of whales. In its patience, it reminds us that time is not a river flowing forward, but a tide, ebbing and returning, carrying the past into the future. The Abyss's time capsule is not only a record of what has been, it is a warning of what can be. In its cold embrace lie lessons carved by catastrophe and endurance alike, waiting for us to listen. To stand on the deck of a ship and gaze into the endless dark below is to know that beneath those waves, history itself lies sealed, a chronicle written by silence and pressure, kept safe until the day it is read again. How deep-sea fossils rewrite evolution. The story of life is not carved only in mountains or deserts, where paleontologists split open rocks to find shells or bones turned to stone. It is also hidden far below, in the black silence of the deep sea. There, in sediments layered for millions of years, fossils tell of creatures long forgotten, and sometimes they change everything we thought we knew. To study deep-sea fossils is to risk rewriting the script of evolution itself, for they reveal not just the survivors we expected, but ghosts of lineages we thought extinct, and experiments of nature we never imagined. These discoveries remind us that the history of life is not a straight path, but a labyrinth, with twists that defy our neat diagrams and timelines. For decades, scientists believed the fossil record was a patchwork, with wide gaps, whole ages missing because soft creatures vanished without a trace, and deep oceans were beyond reach. What the seafloor has shown, however, is that those gaps were not empty. They were waiting, buried in the abyss, pressed into silence by mud and time. When core samples are pulled from the deep, they reveal layer upon layer of microscopic fossils, plankton, foraminifera, coccolithophores that record changes in climate and life with exquisite precision. These tiny shells, invisible to the naked eye, chart the rise and fall of species across extinctions, proving that evolution is far more continuous than we once believed. They tell us not only when species died, but how swiftly new ones took their place, reshaping our sense of how resilient or fragile life can be. And sometimes, the deep sea gives us more than microfossils. It offers whole creatures, preserved against the odds. In deposits like the Burgess Shale's ancient relatives on the seafloor, soft-bodied animals appear in forms that overturn old ideas. Worms with jaws, shrimp-like predators with armoured limbs, creatures so bizarre they look like nightmares, they show us that the Cambrian explosion was even stranger than textbooks once described. These fossils whisper that the roots of animal life were tangled, experimental, filled with dead ends and wild designs. They force us to admit that our lineage is not the inevitable crown of nature, but just one branch among thousands, most broken, some flourishing. There are fossils too that appear out of time, as if the ocean had kept them hidden until we were ready to find them. Coelacanths, thought to have vanished with the dinosaurs, were found alive in the 20th century, swimming in deep waters unchanged for 65 million years. Their fossil record told us they were gone, the deep sea corrected us. Such discoveries remind us that extinction, as written in stone, is sometimes a mirage. The ocean can keep survivors secret, their fossils misread as epitaphs when in fact they were prologues. Even more startling are the ways deep-sea fossils reveal mass extinctions in detail sharper than any land deposit. At the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene, a thin line of clay rich in iridium lies on the seabed, proof of the asteroid strike that ended the age of dinosaurs. Within that line, fossils of plankton vanish, replaced by new species above. The deep sea holds the transition like a photograph, showing the moment evolution was forced to start over. Without these marine records, we might never have understood how sudden, how brutal that extinction truly was, or how quickly the survivors rebuilt the web of life. The abyss also preserves experiments in gigantism and adaptation that challenge our views of what life can be. The jaws of mosasaurs, the shells of ammonites, the teeth of ancient sharks, they remind us that the ocean has been the stage of monstrous innovations, many of which lasted for millions of years before vanishing. Some of these designs still echo in modern creatures, whales echoing mosasaurs, squids recalling ammonites, sharks continuing their endless reign. To see these fossils is to see echoes across time, patterns repeating in new forms, proof that evolution is both creative and cyclical. But perhaps the most humbling truth is how these fossils force us to confront our ignorance. For every discovery that rewrites a page of evolution, there are countless more locked beneath miles of water and stone, still hidden. We know only fragments, only the slivers the ocean has allowed us to glimpse. And yet, even those fragments have been enough to overturn dogmas, redraw charts, and force new questions. How many lineages are we still blind to? How many revolutions in life's history remain entombed in the deep? To hold a deep-sea fossil is to hold contradiction. It is ancient yet immediate, alien yet familiar. It is proof of extinction and proof of survival. It is both a relic and a revelation. These fossils tell us that the ocean has always been the true engine of life, not the land, and that to understand evolution fully, we must listen to the silence of the abyss. How deep-sea fossils rewrite evolution is not only in the creatures they reveal, but in the humility they demand. They remind us that the story of life is not finished, not fixed, but forever unfolding, waiting for us to dig deeper. Beneath the crushing pressure and eternal dark lies the greatest library ever assembled, its shelves written in stone. And every time we crack one open, we learn that the story we thought we knew is only the beginning. Ancient DNA in the depths. In the silence of the deep sea, where sunlight has never reached and pressure grinds even stone, one might think nothing could endure except fossils, hard shapes pressed into rock, shadows of creatures long gone. Yet in rare places, something more fragile lingers, something almost impossible. The ghostly imprint of life, carried not in bone or shell, but in code. Ancient DNA, hidden in sediments, teeth, or even within the pores of fossilized bone, survives against time itself. To find such threads in the depths is to open a new chapter in history. For DNA is more than memory, it is instruction, the very script of life. And when recovered from the ocean floor, it allows us not only to see what lived, but to hear the whispers of how. The ocean is a strange keeper of DNA. On the surface, heat and oxygen erase it quickly, broken down by light and decay. But in the cold muds of the abyss, where oxygen is scarce and temperatures hover just above freezing, fragments endure. Sediments act as vaults, sealing molecules away from destruction. In some cores drilled from the seafloor, researchers have uncovered genetic fragments tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years old. These are not complete genomes, not the full blueprints of creatures, but shards, yet even shards speak. From them, scientists can tell what species once swam above, what plants drifted near, even what climates shaped their survival. It is as though the abyss writes its own diary, line by line, in molecules invisible to the naked eye. Some of the most striking finds are the remains of plankton and microorganisms, locked in mud like pressed flowers in a book. Their DNA tells us how they shifted with ice ages, how entire populations collapsed and then returned, how subtle changes in temperature or salinity shaped the course of life. These records are sharper than stone fossils, for they show not just who lived, but how their very genes responded to the turning of the world. Evolution is not just in bones, it is in the dance of DNA, and the deep sea has preserved some of its oldest steps. Whales, too, leave their traces behind. When their bones fall to the seafloor, they are feasted upon by scavengers, then slowly buried. Within those bones, sometimes, scraps of DNA survive clues to the giants that roamed long before our records began. These fragments allow us to trace lineages, to see how modern whales connect to their Paleogene ancestors, to watch the transformation from land-walking beasts to rulers of the ocean, written not only in shape but in sequence. To glimpse such threads is to realize that evolution is not merely sculpted in form but encoded in letters, carried forward through epochs. Even more startling are discoveries of ancient DNA in places where we thought time had erased everything. In Arctic and Antarctic waters, sediments have yielded genetic fragments millions of years old. From them we have learned of past ecosystems now vanished, oceans warmed by climates long gone, filled with creatures we might never have suspected without molecular proof. These finds push the boundaries of possibility, for DNA is fragile, yet here it is, enduring against the odds, preserved by the cold embrace of the sea. But such discoveries also haunt us, for they whisper of what remains unknown. If DNA can survive in deep-sea sediments for hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps longer in perfect conditions, what secrets does the abyss still hold? Could fragments of vanished leviathans, of ammonites, or even stranger forms still linger buried in mud? We cannot yet know. For now, we only recover the most recent ghosts, but already, what has been found is enough to shake our sense of finality. Extinction, long thought absolute, begins to blur when its genetic traces remain, telling us that nothing ever vanishes completely. Ancient DNA from the depths also changes how we see ourselves. Human history too lies entangled with the sea. Pollen, spores, and traces of our ancestors' passage wash into the ocean, sink, and are preserved in sediment. From them we can trace migrations, the rise of agriculture, even the burning of forests. The deep sea does not only remember the monsters, it remembers us. Our story, like theirs, is being written quietly in mud, waiting for future ages to read. The presence of ancient DNA in the deep is more than a curiosity. It is a bridge, linking the fossil record to the living present. Bones tell us shapes, stones tell us time, but DNA tells us the invisible, the bloodlines, the kinships, the silent transformations of genes across millennia. To recover it is to hear voices the stone alone could never speak, to fill in the silence with music too delicate for fossils to hold. And yet, there is fragility in this knowledge. Ancient DNA is never whole, never pure. It comes in fragments, easily lost, easily broken. To reconstruct it is to weave together tatters into a tapestry, knowing some threads are missing forever. But even in this incompleteness, the message is powerful. The deep sea, in its silence, has shown us that life's story is richer than bones alone reveal, that even the most delicate traces can endure where light cannot. Ancient DNA in the depths is a reminder that the ocean is not only a grave but an archive, preserving not just bodies but codes, the very alphabets of life. It humbles us, for it means that history is written in places we once thought barren, in molecules we once thought too fragile. The abyss, patient and unyielding, has kept these secrets until we were ready to uncover them, and in doing so, it has rewritten what we thought possible not only for the story of evolution, but for the endurance of life's most fragile script, the Challenger and the deep discoveries. The year was 1872 when the HMS Challenger set sail, a wooden warship stripped of its guns and turned into a vessel of science. Its voyage would last nearly 4 years, crossing the world's oceans, dredging the seafloor, hauling nets from the abyss, and probing depths no human eye had ever seen. What began as an ambitious survey became a revelation, a journey that laid the foundations of modern oceanography. The Challenger's work showed the world that the ocean was not an empty void but a living archive of history, and its discoveries echoed like thunder across the halls of science. This was the dawn of deep-sea exploration, the moment when humanity first dared to ask the abyss what secrets it held, and the abyss, reluctantly, began to answer. The crew of the Challenger measured currents, charted temperatures, and sounded the sea with weighted ropes that sank into unimaginable darkness. In one place, the rope dropped for nearly 200 meters before striking bottom, uncovering what we now know as the Mariana Trench. At the time, such depth seemed almost unreal, as though the ocean had no end. To sailors accustomed to the roll of the surface, the idea of miles of water beneath them was both terrifying and exhilarating. The Challenger proved that the seas were far deeper, far stranger, than anyone had dared to believe. Yet it was not only depth that the Challenger revealed. It hauled up life from those depths. Life no one expected to exist. Victorian science clung to the azoic hypothesis, which held that no organisms could live below 600 meters, that the deep ocean was a sterile desert. The dredges and nets of the Challenger shattered that belief. Strange starfish, brittle crinoids, and gelatinous creatures rose from the darkness, proof that the abyss was not barren but teeming with forms adapted to its silence and pressure. This revelation alone was enough to rewrite how humanity saw the ocean not as a lifeless void, but as a vast, thriving world beyond the reach of light. Among the most startling finds were fossils and sediments that spoke of deep time. Samples taken from the seafloor contained the shells of microscopic foraminifera, their intricate spirals preserved in mud. These tiny fossils became keys to Earth's climate history, each species tied to particular conditions of warmth, salinity, and depth. By studying them, scientists could begin to piece together the changing face of the planet across ages. The Challenger had not only explored the ocean, it had opened a time capsule, revealing that the deep sea itself was a record of evolution and catastrophe. The ship's collections were staggering in scale. Thousands of new species were catalogued, drawn, and preserved, from shrimps and sponges to bizarre gelatinous creatures unlike anything seen on land. Entire volumes of reports followed, published over decades, making the Challenger expedition one of the most ambitious scientific undertakings of its age. But beyond the specimens themselves, what mattered most was the shift in perception. The abyss was no longer an unknown void. It was a frontier, a living, breathing part of Earth's story. The discoveries also held a quiet power of awe. Imagine the sailors peering into buckets of dredged creatures, watching luminous eyes and translucent bodies writhing in the air, things that had never before been touched by light. To them, it must have seemed as though the ocean had surrendered fragments of another world, a place of alien shapes and impossible survival. These moments bridged myth and science, for the monsters of sailors' tales, though exaggerated, were rooted in truth. The deep really was full of creatures beyond imagination, and in the years that followed, the Challenger's findings became the cornerstone of marine science. It proved that the deep was not lifeless, that sediments could preserve Earth's ancient climate, that the ocean's depths were vaster than known, and that exploration required patience and boldness in equal measure. Without it, our maps of the sea would still be blank, our understanding of the abyss still shaped by fear rather than fact. Yet the Challenger was only the beginning. Its ropes and dredges, crude compared to modern submersibles, hinted at wonders it could never fully capture. What it showed us was a glimpse, a doorway into the abyss. The true scope of deep-sea life, the vastness of its fossils, the mysteries of its trenches, all these would only be revealed later, as new expeditions carried forward the Challenger's torch. Still, its importance cannot be overstated. The Challenger expedition transformed the ocean from mystery into subject, from myth into science. It was the first time humanity reached with deliberate hands into the deep and pulled back not just fear, but knowledge. And in doing so, it reminded us that the sea is not an alien world, it is our world, one we had simply ignored. The Challenger and the deep discoveries it made remind us that the ocean's secrets are not given freely. They are earned by persistence, by daring to ask questions, by lowering ropes into darkness and pulling back whatever answers the abyss will allow. From the shells of foraminifera to the bones of forgotten creatures, from the cold mud to the living monsters of the dark, the Challenger's legacy is that the deep remembers, and now, because of it, so do we. When science met the abyss, there was a time when the ocean was seen as a wall, not a window. Sailors knew its surface, its tempests, its endless horizon, but what lay beneath remained cloaked in fear and myth. The deep sea was imagined as a grave of monsters, a place where pressure crushed and darkness devoured, a void beyond the reach of human curiosity. For centuries, even the brightest minds believed it barren, lifeless, too hostile to harbour anything more than silence. But that belief began to shatter when science, armed with courage and crude tools, dared to meet the abyss. What followed was a confrontation as much with imagination as with reality. For in probing the depths, humanity discovered not emptiness, but a record of life as ancient and rich as the stars. The meeting began with hesitation. In the early 19th century, naturalists debated whether life could exist below a few hundred fathoms. Edward Forbes, a respected British scientist, famously proposed the azoic hypothesis, insisting that beyond 600 meters, the ocean floor was sterile. His claim carried weight, shaping the way scholars thought of the abyss. To them, it was not a cradle of life, but its boundary. Yet even as this idea spread, fishermen were dredging up creatures from greater depths, strange starfish, urchins, and corals that should not have existed if Forbes were right. Science was being challenged by its own shadows, pressed by evidence that the abyss was not empty at all. The real transformation came when technology gave curiosity sharper teeth. Weighted lines, dredges, and sounding devices began to scratch the surface of the unknown. The HMS Challenger expedition, launched in 1872, became the turning point. With miles of rope and nets lowered into the dark, it brought back proof that life thrived in the deep. Creatures of delicate glass spines, jelly-bodied drifters, and shell-covered survivors of ages long past. The abyss had spoken, and its answer was undeniable. No longer could the sea be dismissed as a void. It was alive, and it had always been alive, a world parallel to our own, hidden only by the limits of our vision. But the Challenger was not alone in this awakening. Across Europe and America, scientists began to study the sediments pulled from the deep. In them, they found microfossils, tiny shells of foraminifera, and coccolithophores layered in orderly succession, each layer a page in Earth's long diary. These discoveries revealed not just the presence of life, but its continuity, stretching back through epochs of climate change and extinction. The abyss was not just a place where creatures lived, it was an archive where history itself had been filed away, grain by grain, shell by shell. With each dredge and core, the image of the deep changed. What had once been imagined as monstrous or sterile revealed itself to be intricate, delicate, and ordered. There were no krakens waiting to drag ships into the dark, but there were organisms more alien than myth had ever dared. Anglerfish with lanterns hanging from their foreheads, shrimp that glowed like embers, worms with jaws of crystal. To scientists of the 19th century, these were revelations that blurred the line between legend and reality. The abyss was not dead, nor was it monstrous in the way sailors feared. It was stranger, subtler, more alive than anyone had guessed. And so, science met the abyss not as conqueror but as student. Each discovery humbled, forcing humanity to abandon assumptions. The deep sea showed that life could thrive without sunlight, that ecosystems could bloom around chemical vents where heat and minerals poured from Earth's crust, that the boundaries of survival were far wider than anyone imagined. It taught us that the narrative of life was not written solely on land, nor even in the shallows, but in the black pressure of the ocean's heart. Every fossil, every organism pulled from the deep, became a reminder that life does not fear extremes, it adapts to them. This meeting also reshaped human ambition. No longer content to sail only the surface, explorers began to dream of descending. Submersibles, diving bells, and later, bathyscaphes carried men into the crushing dark, where they saw with their own eyes the landscapes hinted at by fossils and dredges. They saw mountains and trenches, plains of ooze stretching farther than any desert, and creatures gliding silently through black water, luminous as stars. The abyss had become not a myth to be feared, but a frontier to be studied, its mysteries infinite and inviting. Yet, even as science triumphed, the abyss kept its secrets close. For every discovery, 1,000 questions emerged. Why did some creatures endure unchanged for millions of years while others vanished overnight? How did ecosystems bloom without sunlight? What else lay buried in sediments we had yet to touch? Meeting the abyss was not the end of mystery, but its beginning, a reminder that knowledge is never final. The deep sea, vast beyond comprehension, offered just enough revelation to draw us deeper while withholding far more than it revealed. When science met the abyss, it was an encounter that transformed both. For us, it meant new ways of seeing life, evolution, and the resilience of nature. For the ocean, it meant becoming not just a boundary but a book, not just a grave but a library. The myths of emptiness were replaced with truths stranger than fiction, truths written in fossils, sediments, and glowing flesh. To this day, the legacy of that meeting endures. Each expedition, each dive, each drilled core continues the conversation that began when rope first sank into the black water. The abyss has become our greatest teacher, a place where the rules of life are constantly rewritten. And in its depths, we are reminded of something both humbling and profound, that the world is larger, older, and more intricate than our minds can grasp. Science sought to measure the ocean. Instead, it discovered infinity, legacy of the sunless deep. The legacy of the sunless deep is not measured in gold or empire, but in memory older than mountains. Beneath the crushing blackness, where sunlight has never reached, the abyss has preserved the world's oldest stories. Fossils pressed into mud, DNA fragments hidden in bone, the shells of plankton layered like pages of a book, all remain in the care of a sea that never forgets. While the surface burns, freezes, and rebuilds itself in endless cycles of change, the deep holds steady, a vault of life's continuity. It is the sunless deep that has given us the truest account of evolution, for its silence has preserved what storms, fire, and time might otherwise erase. Its legacy begins in the Cambrian, when life's earliest experiments left impressions in fine silt that hardened into stone. Strange creatures with limbs like paddles and eyes like lanterns, their bodies too delicate for survival in shallow churn, found their immortality in the patience of the abyss. Without those records, the origins of animal life would remain a blur, reduced to fragments and speculation. Instead, the deep gave us visions of what once was. Trilobites crawling across the seafloor, Hallucigenia stretching its spines into darkness, Anomalocaris sweeping prey into its circular jaws. The sunless deep became the first archivist, ensuring that life's dawn would not vanish into rumour. Through each extinction, the abyss carried its burden faithfully. When the Permian seas turned toxic and life on Earth nearly ended, it was the sediments of the deep that recorded the silence. Fossils vanish abruptly at that horizon, plankton disappear, reefs collapse, and yet layer by layer, the ocean floor kept the evidence. Millions of years later, the abyss recorded the revival: new shells, new teeth, new designs replacing the old. Its sediments are not just a record of death, but of endurance, the rebirth of ecosystems that refuse to let darkness win. The sunless deep remembers endings, but it also remembers beginnings, both pressed together in the same stone. Its legacy also lies in the giants. The ocean floor holds the teeth of sharks larger than carriages, the shells of ammonites coiled like spirals of architecture, the bones of whales whose bulk rivaled castles. These titans swam in a world without us, yet the deep carried their memory forward, tucking their remains into layers of pressure and cold. When we split those rocks open, we do not just find relics, we find echoes, reminders of a time when the seas were ruled by creatures as strange and mighty as any myth. Without the abyss, their memory would have been dissolved and scattered. With it, they live still, their shapes emerging whenever stone is cracked by curious hands. The sunless deep has another legacy: truth. For centuries, humanity filled the unknown with fear. Sailors spoke of krakens and serpents, of monsters that dragged ships into the black. But when science lowered its nets, what it pulled up was no less wondrous. Anglerfish with lanterns sprouting from their skulls, jellyfish glowing with ghostly fire, worms with fanged jaws shining in the dark. These were not legends, but living proof that the abyss was stranger than imagination. The deep humbled us, showing that its creatures needed no myth to be marvellous. Its legacy is the transformation of terror into wonder, of superstition into revelation. Yet the deepest legacy of all is continuity. The abyss does not forget, from the shells of foraminifera marking ancient climates to the iridium clay layer of the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs, it holds the threads of every age, woven without interruption. Even now, as we add our own layer, plastic, oil, steel, the deep accepts it, recording us alongside ammonites and trilobites. Long after we are gone, the abyss will keep our story too, sealed in darkness, waiting for whatever eyes might come to read it. And so, the legacy of the sunless deep is not only of the past, but of the future. It reminds us that memory is not fragile, not fleeting, but enduring if preserved in silence. The ocean has carried the whole arc of life within its mud and stone, gifting us knowledge we could never have gathered alone. Its fossils rewrite evolution, its sediments chronicle catastrophe, its creatures prove that life knows no bounds. To listen to the abyss is to learn humility, for in its silence lies a wisdom greater than ours, that nothing vanishes completely, that every life leaves a mark, and that time itself has witnesses in the dark. The sunless deep endures as Earth's most faithful historian. It does not speak in words, but in stone, in shells, in shadows of flesh pressed flat and hardened. Its testimony is impartial, absolute, untouched by vanity or forgetting. To split open its fossils is to hear a chorus of voices too old for memory, too vast for myth, too enduring for silence. That is its legacy, a library without walls, where evolution is written not by hands but by the weight of water and the patience of darkness. The abyss has seen it all, and it will remember long after we are gone.